What does a non-dual awakening look like? A non-dual awakening is the awakening to duality itself. There is a realization where you notice that you cannot be anything that is of the dual nature of life. And this is realized experientially. It's not being deducted intellectually or psychologically or philosophically. It's being deducted by pure experience. As you see day brought light, you see the non-dual reality of existence. And the reason why there is even such thing as a non-dual awakening is because at times or throughout life, one can identify themselves as some parts of the multiplicity of life's expressions, meaning the hobbies, the opinions, the judgments, all these categories, nationalities, religions, cultures, which are all such beautiful manifestations within reality, beautiful expressions within reality. But the moment one decides to subscribe to a particular set of categories within life, it becomes difficult over time to realize the totality of life, the totality that is not divided by categories, the totality that is free from duality itself. Since there are small parts within life, there must be a totality, there must be an absolute wholeness. There cannot be just parts and fragments without it being a part of a whole. And so a non-dual awakening is realizing that experientially. You begin to see life through calm eyes instead of the lenses that are tainted by the fragmented duality of life. And when I say duality, what do I really mean? We have day and we have night. We have black, we have white. We have men, we have women. But the reason why we know these dualities is because they can only be satisfied in being known as one of the dual pairs because of the opposite existing. So if there was no such thing as night, there would technically only be day. But there wouldn't be a realization of what day is because there is no night to contrast the day. And the same goes with men and women. If there was no men or if there was no women, there would not be a contrast to identify gender at all. This life has come in pairs. And in these pairs, one can get lost and identify as these pairs so deeply that they do not recognize that the very pair or the duality that is recognized in life is because there is a non-dual focal point, an absolute, total, whole, complete focal point. Only completeness can recognize incompleteness. Only wholeness can recognize fragments. To give you a brief analogy, if you imagine a tree, this is my famous tree analogy. If you imagine a tree, maybe one of the ones behind me, if they're not too blurred out, they have a vast number of leaves. Imagine that each leaf has its own identity. It will realize that the other leaves adjacent have a different size, a different color, a different shape. Certain leaves are clustered together. Each leaf has a different story to tell. But what happens when one of these leaves decides to look inwardly, decides to look at the very stem it's attached to and the branch it's attached to, finding its way into the interconnectivity until it reaches the very trunk of the tree? What happens is it sees itself as the totality. It sees itself as the tree at this point. And this is a simple analogy of what it means to have a non-dual awakening. The awakening, the term waking up, is there because you are awakening to this reality. This leaf, for the rest of its life, until it shrivels up, dries and falls to the floor and decomposes and becomes part of the land again, it may only see itself as just a leaf. But if it has made the choice or the will to look into its depths, it may realize that it's actually the whole tree itself. And so this is a brief analogy of what a non-dual awakening is. Another analogy I could give you is that if you are watching a movie, you can get so drawn into this movie. You could be sat in a cinema, amazing surround sound system, all these flashing lights and these scenes. These scenes are short clips, short, 3-4 second clips, really drawing you into the storyline. Up until when someone dies, you feel the pain of loss. When someone wins, you feel the pain and the joy of triumph. You are essentially the story. You become the story. But then your phone might buzz, which is in your pocket, and it might just wake you up. You realize, oh, I am in the cinema watching this movie. I am not the movie. The same transition of realizing that you are not the movie that is on the screen, that you are that which is observing the screen, is a non-dual awakening. You are waking up to the duality of reality. You wake up and you don't see yourself as a small, little me who has, 9 degrees, who is very rich or poor, who is illiterate, who has a lot of accumulations, a big house or a small house. No matter what the circumstances are, if they are identified with, then this becomes your reality. But waking up to the realization that you are not any of the fragmented, dual aspects of life, something beautiful begins to unfold within you. It's almost like a light is shining within you. Now, I've spoken, I've given you some analogies, and I've kind of tread towards the philosophical side of things. It's almost like I'm trying to convince you what non-duality or a non-dual awakening looks like. But let's do this now. Let's try to wake up right now. Because non-duality is the only reality from which all is manifested. that means that just because you have not woken up to it, it does not make it untrue. The same way with the tree and the leaf. Just because the leaf hasn't realized that it's the entire tree, in essence, does not mean that it's untrue if it doesn't realize it's the entire tree. So the truth is already here. We just have to turn to look at it. It's as simple as that. So let's do this right now. No time is needed. No effort is needed. No energy is needed. Like I said, the reason why you are able to recognize duality or recognize categories or any aspects of life is because of the non-dual focal point. The other term of this non-dual focal point can be the sense of being. Another term can be the sense of awareness. Another term can be the sense of consciousness. Other people refer to this as God. There are so many different terms for this, but let's not get too hooked up into this. I might use a few interchangeably. But if I asked you the question, do you exist? What would the answer be? And this isn't a challenging question. It's not a trick question. It's not a question to try and measure your intellectual capabilities. It's none of that. It's a very simple question. If you are asked, do you exist? What would the answer be? The answer would be yes. You exist. Now, the time that it has taken between asking the question and actually answering it, in between, what really took place? There is a sense of verification that has had to take place before you answer the question of, do you exist? And so what is it that is really being verified? Now, this type of verification does not need any type of conviction. So you are not looking for evidence to verify that you exist. There is a small, or there is a subtle underlying knowing, sense of knowing that you exist. In other words, existing is self-evident. So you know that you exist because you exist. There is no reason why. And there is no justification needed. Now, what we want to do is we want to sit in that space of verification itself, that self-evident space of existence. When you are asked, do you exist? And you say yes, it's verified because of this sense of existence. Now, I want you to rest in this sense of existence. Be that existence. And then what happens is some thoughts may come along, some questions may come up. Within this existence, there is an infinite number of movements. Emotional movements, psychological movements, all types of different movements. What do we want? Do we want to be swayed by these movements? No. Let's allow ourselves to hold still in this sense of existence. For some of you, you might struggle to hold that sense of existence because the value that one of these movements has taken, one of these thoughts has taken, might have somewhat of a heavy weight, and so it does sway you. For an example, you may be watching this video and all of a sudden you have gotten a phone call. And so this is still happening within existence, but resting in that sense of being or sense of existing, one can get distracted. One can get distracted. It does not mean that you stop, existing. That's not what is meant here at all. It just means that you have been distracted. And so as we get distracted, let's bring ourselves back to this sense of existing. Or the other word is the sense of being. Just being. There is no justification for it. There's no story for it. There's nothing for it. It's just happening right here and right now. It's happening regardless of the movement that takes place, regardless of the thoughts that come up, regardless of the emotions that are experienced, regardless of the sensations that are experienced, regardless of anything. Existing or being just is. It's a happening. It's happening as is. And so if we rest in that, the next interesting question to ask would then be, this sense of being, can it leave you? Can this sense of being actually leave you? Try to get away from it. Try to get away from this sense of being. Hopefully you can see that this is what I mean with this sense of being is always there. It's not something that goes and comes back. It is something that can be covered and uncovered with the movement that takes place. There is always that sense of being. It cannot leave you. It cannot. Another question would be, this sense of being, where is it located? Where is it felt? Where is it located? That's another interesting question, because some people may say, I feel it in my chest, in my stomach, in my head. But wherever you look, wherever you are, that sense of being is there. I could be looking at the furthest point possible. That sense of being is there. I could close my eyes and not see the distance between objects at all. And I know that the sense of being is there. This very sense of being then, are you able to experience anything where that sense of being isn't there? Are you able to experience anything outside of this sense of being, or awareness, if you like, or consciousness, or the sense of existing? Are you able to experience anything outside of it? It's impossible. Because the very primary or essential or prerequisite before anything, before any movement or any object, before anything appears, there is that sense of being, there is that sense of knowing, there is that essential sense of awareness that is always ever present. Has this sense of being ever left you? Where does this sense of being come from? You know, some people will say that this sense of being or consciousness is generated in the brain. There is no evidence of that. Firstly, if the brain is dissected, you cannot find consciousness. However, the brain, which is a material object or a material aspect of this reality, how can material generate consciousness, which is the very essence that allows for materialization to be realized or recognized? The reason why I know that there is this dry grass is simply because there is that underlying knowing, that sense of being, or that sense of existing. And so if I say that this sense of existing is generated in the brain, how would that make sense? Because the brain is no different to this very object or this dry grass. It's no different. The same way that dry grass is being realized or witnessed or known, so would the brain. Now, a lot of people mistake the movements that take place or the content of the experience or the content that takes place within that sense of being. They mistake this for the being itself, for the consciousness itself. But that cannot be true, because movement is recognized. As long as something is recognized, it cannot be it. When you go to sleep, let's suppose that as soon as your head hits the pillow, you wake up again. What happened to the sense of time here? What happened to the content or the movement of the experience? Assuming that you didn't have a dream, or even if you did have a dream, what changes is the content of the experience, the movement itself, but the sense of being, consciousness, awareness is always consistent. So wake up, and see that when I say that you are not anything that moves, it also means the body. You cannot be the body. You cannot be your thoughts. You cannot be ideas. You cannot be a belief system. These have all been accumulated along the way. The only truth is that sense of being. It's the only truth. It's the absolute truth. You cannot find it in between your thoughts. It's not bound by time. When you engage in something that you are deeply interested in, what happens? Time seems to feel quicker, But when you are bored, time slows down. It's not bound by time. It's ever present. When you rest in this sense of being, you cannot help but see the light of that being shine and infiltrate through all aspects of reality, through everything. So let the light of being shine as bright as it wills until you see yourself no more. All you see is the light of being, the light of consciousness, or the light of awareness, because that's truly all there is. Thank you so much for watching. So if you really enjoyed this, you might enjoy this other video. It's quite similar. This is Hassan from the Spiritual Walks. We are on a journey towards the truth.